forward today. Today's a brand new day. It's a brand new season.
You're listening to Arkansas Preps Weekly on Natural State Sports, your top source for the biggest news in high school sports across Arkansas.
And here we go, here we go.
Already, Kevin, I forgot to unmute my mic. We're starting off exactly how we always have. Well, maybe not always start, but at least how we get to at some point. But now that I've gotten the muting of the mic out of the way, or unmuting the mic out of the way, my name's Kyle Sutherland alongside the baseball guru, Kevin Bohannon, who also does football stuff, believe it or not, prior to what some people say. But this is Arkansas Preps Weekly, episode number 26. We are glad to be back with you. This is actually the first one Cabo and I have done together since the summer. Now, I did produce a few of his summer podcast series, but this is really the first time since we recapped the baseball state championships that you and I have been on. And we've done a little bit of football stuff here and there before, but now it is on us as far as the week-to-week coverage. So this is I always forget, I think it's year 5 of us going into doing content creation together. So looking forward to this.
Yeah, 21, 22, 23, and 24. So, yeah, really excited. Of course, we started in the fall of 2020 with COVID and everything. So, yeah, for a lot of our listeners, they're like, why is the baseball guy talking about football? Guys, football is, always the love. My dad coached it, taught for 39 years. I played quarterback at Mills in the late 90s. We weren't very good, but I was able to go play college ball, and actually coached at North Pulaski and Sylvan Hills for 4 years till I got back into the day job. And, that's where we're at right now. So I've also, been on the buzz. I think this will be year number 4 with the scoreboard show. Thanks to Randy and Barry for allowing me to do that with them. And then every Friday, our Football Friday and Sonic Blast. So as my wife says, it's getting ready to be a girls' night every Friday till December. So I'm excited about it. There's a lot to be excited about this year, Kyle.
Yeah, no doubt. And I always say this time of year, since you and I have both been on the buzz during football, if you don't like hearing my voice and your voice from about 4 till midnight, you don't want to listen during that range, because you're going to be on. Fridays. Yeah, it's mainly Fridays, because you're going to be on from 4 to 6:45. Then myself, RJ, and Josh Neighbors will come on for the game of the week. And then you, Barry, and Randy will close out the Friday night, literally going into Saturday on the scoreboard show. So we're looking forward to another year of that. But if you are watching this show or listening, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube as well as the audio platforms, whether it be Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio. We are on all of those. So as we begin a new school year, we're going to start, as if you followed the platform of this show and the previous podcast on the previous outlet, you'll know that typically we start from the top and then work our way down. So we're going to give, I guess you could say, a little bit of a preview. There's already been a lot of different previews between what we did at Media Days, Hooten's Arkansas Football, various outlets. We're going to go a little bit more in detail as far as some of our contenders. I mean, I know a lot of people have the same contenders. We'll talk about a few sleepers, but just kind of go in a little bit more detail about what these teams are currently dealing with. So we'll start it up at the top in Class 7A. Cabo, anytime you start to talk about this, whether it be in the spring or when you get into summer, it's always in the Central. You start with, at least in recent memory, you start with Bryant, you start with Conway, then up in the West, you start with Bentonville and Fayetteville. Now, out of all of these teams, I think Bentonville is probably the most unique situation, because last year, Carter Nye, who was a great quarterback for this team, he goes down. Then in comes Cole Slepecki, who was a sophomore at the time. Just and did a pretty good job. I actually did a really good job for considering the situation. So you start there at quarterback. You got Chris Ficklin back. You've got some other key pieces, but I mean, you lose CJ Brown. You lose Luke Kuhn. So I think out of even though Conway is replacing quite a bit as well, out of those 4 teams mentioned, Conway, Bryant, Bentonville, and Fayetteville, I think probably the one that I have the most questions about. Not that they're going to be good, just really maybe how long that it takes for everything to click if you're Bentonville with all that they're having to replace.
Yeah, and you talk about CJ Brown, losing a guy like that everybody knew where he was on the field at every moment. You can go back to the state title game against Fayetteville. He had a long touchdown catch. They were bracketing him. They had one to the outside and then a safety over the top. It didn't matter. He was returning kicks, returning punts. So losing a guy like that that's likely to get some reps for the Razorbacks this year is a huge blow. But, losing a Carter Nye, who was a two-sport star, All-State in both baseball and football, it's going to hurt. So what do they look like? So Bentonville has just really been a machine, since Barry Lunny Sr. was there, now Jody Grant. So what's their offense going to look like? They're going to still put stuff together. They're going to work hard. They send 150, 160 guys through, what we used to call two-a-days, back in the spring. So they're going to be there. And it's just a matter of, can little brother Bentonville West, who I consider the sleeper in this bunch, on the outside looking in, can they creep into, taking over Fayetteville? How do you lose 50 points a game on offense? Your Power 5 quarterback goes to Minnesota and expect to win it all again. Well, you get transfers. That's how you build a football club these days. That's how you build an offense, a defense. Doesn't matter. It's plug and play, and that's what we've seen. And that's the biggest question this year across every classification, in my opinion, is how is it going to work with this transfer portal? It's not a portal, but that's what people call it. How's it going to work? And, is the chemistry going to be there? Is Conway going to be able to replace 10 starters and those guys on offense, and those guys be able to come in and learn the Buck James philosophy in 1 year and have a chemistry? The reason Buck James was so successful at Bryant was he was able to build his culture from the beginning. He brought kids in, but those kids were there for 3 or 4 years. And by the time they got through junior high and 9th grade, they knew what to do on a day-to-day basis. How is it going to work in a smaller scale in these tradition-rich cultures? That's the biggest question I have. And Grayson Wilson going to Conway, that's, that offense with Mark Kelly and, his old coach who got hired on that staff. What's it going to look like? Quad Sanders year 2, PA Little Rock Christian coming up to Class 7A. It's finally time to see if PA can play with the big boys. I think they can because of what they've done. It's the only classification they haven't won a state title in. So let's see if they can do it.
I think that's probably the biggest questions is in the Central, mainly because Little Rock Christian and PA moving in. Cabot's always going to be – even last year when they had some struggles, particularly on offense and having to deal with all the issues. They had some injuries at quarterback and just a lot of youth. But Bryant, they bring back essentially a 3-year start. I know that Gideon Motes and Jordan Walker and Gideon Motes kind of split reps during Jordan's sophomore year, but essentially a 3-year starter. You're going to have likely another 3-headed monster at running back. That's pretty much what Bryant has become.
So good.
Yeah. I mean, that's what they've become accustomed to. Their offense is definitely they got a lot coming back. They did lose some on the offensive line, but defensively, what Quad Sanders and co has been able to do there. But then you look at Conway. You mentioned Grayson Wilson coming in, and Wesley Tapp is a really good quarterback. I mean, you certainly
very high on him,
right? Yeah, very high on him. There's been a lot of good talk. Even talking, you mentioned Coach Ryan Howard now being on staff. He's been very, very high on him. I talked to him during the shootout of the South. That was, of course, at the time that Grayson had only been with the team for about a week or so, but. Conway only brings back 1 starter. Buck James talked about how he really feels good about his offensive line, has some good receivers. They're just a lot of them are very unproven. I think it is 1 or 2. Very green. So that's probably the biggest questions. Outside of Bentonville and Fayetteville in the West, what is Rogers going to do with Jeff Reagan, who is a phenomenal athlete? He's moving to quarterback. You talked about Bentonville West, probably another sleeper.
Dane Williams, yeah,
absolutely. And so then you go to the Central. And my biggest thing with PA and Little Rock Christian is not can they compete for maybe one of those top 3 or top 4 spots where you get at least one. I think up to the 4th spot, you get at least one home playoff game. Yeah. So that's big right there. So can they – I know that they're going to compete for those, but it's when – let's say that, Lord forbid, like a situation last year where John Mark Charette, their top target, he goes out in game 1. Of course, Brandon Cobb, he really gutted through playing with that club on his non-throwing. I think it was on his non-throwing hand.
They lost running backs before the year even started.
Right. Yeah. He moved to Tennessee. So that's the biggest thing is depth-wise, how will Little Rock Christian and PA depth-wise and injuries? Yes.
Yeah, because and it's like I mentioned at the top of the show is look, Bentonville and Fayetteville, they're used to running out in the triple digits, 120, 130 guys. They have travel rosters at that level. I remember when we were at El Dorado, and this was back, 95, 96, we had travel rosters because we had 105 players, and we could only travel so many per AAA rules. So these bigger clubs have that. Little Rock Christian and PA don't. They're playing with 4A level, 5A level rosters. So, the competitive equity factor, this is the really big test because you had all of the big boys move up classification. Harding went to 5. Shiloh went to 6. The 2 Central Arkansas schools went to 7. So is this really where they belong, or will they kind of come back down to earth and say, okay, that they really need to be in 6 because they did compete. They did win a state title. Little Rock Christian went to the state title game last year, lost to Greenwood. So it's going to be really interesting. You go back to Cabot real quick. And if we remember Scott Reed's teams from El Dorado, very fundamentally sound. Of course, he had his sons, pulling the trigger back there at quarterback. They have to find some consistency offensively. The biggest offensive, firepower they've had is now a slot back at Harding University, averaging 15 yards, 16 yards a carry. So I want to see them be more consistent on offense. The defense has always been there, and it's always has been under Cabot, whether it be Mike Malham or Scott Reed. So let's see if they can be a little bit more consistent on offense, and that's going to be the deciding factor if they can stick their head and get one of those top 4 seeds, which is all coveted in the 7A playoffs.
And down to Class 6A. This is one that I really wanted to talk about because as much hype as Greenwood is getting, and rightfully so, they're the defending state champions. They've been to, 4 in a row, I believe, since 2020. They won that one. So 4 in a row. Last year, mainly towards the back end of the season, there were some conversations that arose that are they the top team in this? Now, at the time, you were looking at Parkview, you were looking at Fayetteville, and then probably Greenwood were those top 3 that you were looking at as far as a top team overall. Coming into this season, Kevin, I've said it on radio shows, I've said it in conversation, and now I'm going to say it on record in our show. To me, you look at Parkview's roster, and you look now. Also, you can include a Fayetteville maybe in there too. Maybe if you wanted to include a Bryant. But to me, right now, going into the season, probably the 2 best rosters, top to bottom, at least as far as proven what they can do, is Parkview and Greenwood. Parkview they've been talked about. They're the back-to-back 5A champions. They've got talent galore. Well, Greenwood's got talent galore too. And I think that when you look at starting with Kane Archer on offense, starting with Cash Archer on defense, and then you just go all the way down. I mean, Greenwood, they were doing, other than, Parkview didn't make it to the state championship until their 5A season. And since then they've been phenomenal. Meanwhile, Greenwood's just been dominant for pretty much the entire 21st century. Now, that doesn't have anything to do with the ranking for this year, but after all that long windiness that I just went through, to me, I think that these are the 2 that you're talking about, right? That should be talked about as the number 1 team overall, at least as far as going into week 0.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kyle. And people forget Brad Bolding didn't just step into Parkview and made them good overnight. I was there his first game at the stadium against Benton, and Benton wasn't the powerhouse they are now. They were a good team. They were an 8-9 win team. But, Gary Allman, who was a really good athlete, played baseball for Parkview, but, he did everything for, Bolding's offense back then. He was kind of a wildcat quarterback that could really throw it, good under pressure, just a great kid. So he had to build depth and acquire the talent that they've gotten over the past 4 years. So, we really got put on notice 2 years ago when they played Bryant so close. And I think that was the moment where we saw, like, okay, they're going to do this and they're going to do it their own way. And then he brought in his brother after, Coach Bobby Bolding left Whitehall and said, okay, let's go be DC. And now it's just a machine. So what happens when you build a monster, Kyle? You have to feed the monster. And that's the problem. But that's something Greenwood's been doing for 26 years now. Go back and think to when Brooks Coatney, and Brooks is my age, and we graduated the same year in '99. Back then that's when it really started, and then Rick Jones came in, and now you got Coach Young that just takes it, and they're pulling off from over the Fort Smith area now. We know that. Fort Smith Southside dropped down in classifications. I think this is the first time Southside won't be in the largest classification in umpteen. I can go back. to how long it's been since Southside hasn't been in that top classification. It's been in my lifetime. So, and I'm 43. So, Greenwood, it's, Kane Archer, and you and I have talked about this. Hey, when he was, 7th, 8th grade, he was going to be the next phenom. Well, yeah, he's a 4-star quarterback. Is he the best in the state? That's up for debate. I really like a young man at Benton. I mean, there's a lot to like about Benton this year. Replacing Braylon Russell is going to be the key. What can they do? Are they going to do it by committee? They got so many talented weapons out there, talking about Payne on the outside. So, Benton's going to push. They're going to push hard. Can they make it over that hump? They've been right there. They've been so close. Coach Harris, they talk about it all the time down there. It's like, what do we have to do every day to get better? And that's what they're going to do. So, and then the wild card, Shiloh Christian. Hey, let's go to 6A. Hey, guess what? We're going to start a sophomore quarterback too, and we're going to beat everybody. So the 6A West looks a lot different this year. You take out PA, you take out Little Rock Christian, but now you got Southside, you got Shiloh Christian. Is Lake Hamilton going to be coming back? Easton Hurley last year went out on October 15th. Otherwise, they could have made a run. Coach Gilleran's team seems to be, getting back up there this year. So they're going to be fighting for one of those top playoff spots. And then you got a Russellville, and I know your sleeper Mountain Home. You can talk about them. Coach Airy, for the longest, can't get to the playoffs. Now they get to the playoffs and win a game. Can they get over the hump this year and get a little bit further?
And I'll start there. I've raved about Mountain Home really for the last couple of years, maybe after that first or second playoff win in the first round, because they've gotten 4 in a row now. And that's Coach Airy it's the perfect example of building a team from the ground up. He was is a Missouri Hall of Famer. They're going to play 2 teams from Missouri in the non-conference, I believe. I know at least one, but comes in 23-game losing streak. Then they start to make that progress. And then, as we've said, they've won 4 consecutive first-round playoff games. But now it's, okay, we've had some seasons where we started really strong. We've had some seasons where we finished the regular season strong. We got to put it together there in the middle. So you get one of those higher. You got to go from getting that 5-6 playoff spot to that 3-4 playoff spot. And I think they've got an opportunity, even though that the West right now on paper it was deeper the past few years. And I think it's probably now. I know that last year they really proved that, if I'm not mistaken, I think they swept. The West did. So they certainly were last year. To me, have been the last few years. But it's very deep again, even when you take out Little Rock Christian and PA, because even towards the teams that have finished towards the bottom, I like Van Buren. I like some of the things that they've seen. We just haven't seen them. Right. Yeah, Trenton Cooley's good. They've got a lot of really good. I know they're replacing a really good quarterback, but that's the thing. I like Mo Henry. I like what he's done there, but they got to prove it much better. And they're gonna. I think they're gonna do that at some point. They're gonna get that bigger win, but it's just when they've lost big. Now they got hot. That's it. That's what it is right there. So I think that Van Buren has the potential. It's just they've got to show it, really, for me. But yeah, you look up there, Shiloh Christian, just like Harding Academy that we'll talk about in 5A here in a second. It doesn't matter the classification that they're in. They just continue to compete. Last year, they had that statement game against Little Rock Christian where Bo Williams, I think he's still running during that game. He's still scoring touchdowns. Yards. Unbelievable. I mean, probably the best. It was up there with the top 2 or 3 best performances I've seen by a running back, especially
it was up there with the Michael Dyer performance.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I played against Dyer, and I still have nightmares. So, Shiloh is going to be right up there. Now, how well will they compete with Greenwood? Who knows?
It's a depth issue, just like PA and Little Rock Christian. Yeah.
Right. That's where you run into. And then in the East, you got Benton up there, and then it's kind of like who was the other? There was another one that Southside, like you said, was moving down, but
Catholic. What are they going to look like post Fogelman? The defensive coordinator takes over. Jackson England's a good quarterback. They don't have anybody to throw the ball to. I think they're going to be more of a ground and pound, even though they haven't had the offensive line to do that and sustain a big time running game. But they're going to have to do some of that stuff to, have a successful season, make it where they lost Brooks Ward, they lost Fogelman, they lost a lot of receiving yards from last year. So they're going to have to figure it out and do it their way, rather than conforming to just slinging all over the field.
Well, and you've got Kevin Kelly at Sheridan that's got some. You probably don't expect them to win. He's said on record that he expects to win a state championship. I certainly don't expect them to win a state championship, but I do expect them to compete from the beginning to the end. No question about that. Sylvan Hills, they can't go anywhere but up. The biggest question for me in that conference, and I was going to mention just with Jackson England being one of the better quarterbacks in 6A, how will Catholic look? But to me, past Benton, will it be Marion or Jonesboro? Jonesboro, I know they've gotten some key transfers.
Dropping down from 7A.
Yeah, and they've got a lot I talked to one of their assistants at the Shootout of the South. They've got a lot of big time hope for this year. And then Marion's been one of those consistent ones. So I think really in the East, like you like Greenwood probably the most in the West, but then there's probably about 4 or 5 teams that you could talk about. I don't know that you have that in the East. I think right now you've got 1 or 2 being Marion or Jonesboro, and then the conversation starts for another tier from there.
Yeah, I want to see Jalen Smith for Marion be healthy for an entire year. He put up some astronomical video game numbers last year when he was healthy. So, they're going to be a little bit different this year because, last year you had a quarterback that could just about do everything and then hand it to Jalen and they could put up points. So, they're going to get a good early test to see where they're at. The litmus test is going to be win early on, week 0. So you're going to get to find out about them. And then, those teams that you kind of lump in right there, West Memphis, how are they going to look? You lose Coach Hooks to Osceola, how are they going to look? But El Dorado and Sylvan Hills, they've been those teams that have been really kind of fighting for that 5-6. Coach Hooley at Sylvan Hills, you got some good young talent. Their 8th and 9th grade classes the last couple of years have been really good. Pulaski County School District as a whole, that 8th, 9th grade class, class of 27-28, look at Robinson, Maumelle, Mills, they keep bringing these kids along. It's going to be really good here in Central Arkansas for the next 3 or 4 years. So Sylvan Hills coming off a winless season. It just hurts to say, knowing where that program has been over the years under Coach Sebastian, Coach Withrow. They're going to have to figure it out. It's just, look, as you get more kids, you're going to have to stay in that classification. This is not the 4A Southeast anymore, boys. This is the 6A East. You're playing with the big boys. So they got to go out, be physical, and play their game. End of the story.
Down in Class 5A, we'll just go ahead and say it, and you'll probably hear us say this a lot. Parkview's the favorite until somebody proves otherwise, but there's been a lot of talk about Harding Academy going up. Harding Academy, they've got a B championship from the 70s. They've got an A. They've got a 2A, a 3A, a 4A as of last year. And, of course, they went in 2022 and lost to Malvern. That first year they had bumped up to 4A. Well, now here they are bumping up to Class 5A. Many people, including myself, expect them now. Look, I like Valley View still in the East. There's some other teams that I like there in the East. I think Brooklyn is going to be well improved, going to compete for possibly that 4th playoff spot win under Clay Toddy. I think that they're just going to keep building off of a remarkable season compared to when you think about what they endured, maybe not even having a season. It was looking like after the tornado in March of 2023. But I do expect Harding Academy to completely run through that East Conference. I think that they're probably just a little bit superior to the teams there. But then also in 5A, even though they're ranked high by just about every outlet that you look at, I don't know that people are talking about Robinson enough as they should, because they're coming off of a season that was not bad, but just not what they're accustomed to. The previous 3 out of 4 years before last year, they won 14 games. Each of those seasons had a couple of state championships sprinkled in there. So I think playing the amount of youth, the amount of freshmen and sophomores that they did last year, you bring in a very quality quarterback in Tyson Braden. Deuce Williams coming in from CAC, massive addition to that secondary. So if you're going to beat Parkview, you've got to have speed. Now, Harding Academy has speed. I don't know if they have quite the amount of speed that Robinson does. But Harding Academy, of course, is as fundamentally sound as any football team in the state of Arkansas. But I don't know that quite enough are talking about the Robinson. And I know that they're one of our networks. So, yes, of course, I'm going to give them a plug. But I think they're going to be playing up there right there with the big boys when you talk about Harding Academy and Parkview as well in Class 5A.
Yeah, Nick Abrams is one of the top running backs in the state, no doubt. He's going to look to improve off his year last year. He's going to look to get 1,000 yards. But, yeah, bringing in Braden from North Little Rock, that was a big get. And then I think there were some issues last year. Let's just say it like it is. Those issues are now gone. They've gone out, to another school. So it's going to be interesting. Tyler Updegrove taking over defensive coordinator. Of course, Tyler played for my dad at North Pulaski. He's been at Robinson since day one. I think that's going to be really good. And, Coach Escola, they've been just cranking them out. stay healthy. That's going to be a key for them because their depth isn't what it was during those, 2017, through 2019, and then the last couple of years in 22 and 21. So, getting depth and make sure you don't have any injuries. Early test, PA. That's the early test for those guys. So it's either been really kind of feast or famine with that. You look at that Central Conference. You got Maumelle. What's it going to look like now? You got all these guys coming in. You got Andrew Bjork at quarterback who can also play running back under Coach Maupin. So Pine Bluff, they lost a lot. So Coach Williams down there, he has really turned that program around. It's gotten back to the Z's, of Coach Glover and Coach Bolding. So Pine Bluff's going to be in the conversation right there. Southside dropping down, and we'll talk about them in just a second in Class 4A. Harding Academy, and I love Owen Miller. I've gotten to know the young man over the past 3 years as he's been a starter. He got thrown in the fire as a sophomore when Cade Smith decided just to focus on baseball. And what he do? Come out and he's just been breaking records ever since. 76% completion percentage for his career. Last year, he took a step back a little bit, but it wouldn't surprise me if he completes 80% of his passes this year. He threw, one pick last year, 2 picks? I mean, one of them was in the state title game. So they've got a lot back. Isaac Baker at running back, and they've got the plethora of receivers out there. Just like we said with all the other private schools, it's going to be depth. They can't afford to get anybody hurt going through that schedule. They know what to expect in the 5A East because they've played Valley View the last 3 years. It's funny how in COVID year when somebody canceled and they picked up Valley View all of a sudden, that's not by coincidence. They knew that they were going to be in that conference eventually with the competitive equity factor. So it's going to be interesting. But, yeah, as we say, everybody's chasing Parkview till otherwise stated.
And I want to close 5A talking about that because one of the things that I've seen pretty consistently just in looking at Facebook comments and stuff on Twitter /X is that Parkview doesn't play anybody, which is hilarious. That's hilarious to me because first off, they played in it's not an argument that the 5A South was the toughest conference in Class 5A last year. It's not a debate to me. And I think that it's going to be, I'll say it on record, I think it's going to be the toughest with respect to the Central. I do think that it is going to be
deeper.
South is deeper, and the Central has a chance to maybe challenge that. And who knows? Maybe someone else could prove. Maybe the East or the West could prove me wrong. And there's some things that I haven't researched like I should have, and they could prove me wrong. But the South, first off, when you think of Camden Fairview, you think of at the top there, Hot Springs Lakeside. Garen Rockwell has done a phenomenal job with that program. Magnolia, I think, is going to be really tough. Texarkana, there might not be a state title contender, but I think that Coach Outlaw's done a good job compared to where they were. And, that's a historic program, and they were pretty in the depths. Let's call it what it is. He's at least got them back up to respectability. So I think that, again, that's probably going to be the deepest conference in Class 5A. But then you also think about they ended Bryant's 54-game win streak last year. They've got Bryant again this year. They've got Melissa, Texas, that I've done a little bit of film on because I think I'm doing sideline reporting for that game. I haven't – I'll be down there, but I don't know exactly what I'm doing yet. So you got the Melissa, Texas game. And then you've also got Maumelle that should be just a start. And then there's college prospects galore when you think about the combined that each team has from that. So first off, to say that I don't know how many people are going to be watching or listening to this that need to hear this, but to say that you're not doing your research effectively, in my opinion. But the South, I bring all that up to say that the South Conference, to me, just on paper, as we continue to, we're going to say on paper a lot here over the first couple of weeks.
Yeah, because we haven't seen anything yet.
Because we don't know. We've just seen some 7-on-7s, which is, I'm sorry, it's not. Yeah. Yes, with respect to it, yes, it's hard to do it in the heat, but it's not real football. I'll call it what it is. Yeah. But I do think that the South is going to reign supreme again in the Class 5A just because – not just what people bring back, but I just think that is, again, probably going to be the deepest when you talk about the 4 playoff spots.
Yeah, and you talk about Coach Rockwell at Lakeside and what they did last year, going into Lake Hamilton and beating those guys. That set them up for a run that
first time in like 30 years or whatever it was.
Yeah, and then you got Atkins at quarterback for Camden Fairview and Coach Vaughn, who is part of that Parkview coaching tree. So Coach Vaughn is really kind of set up. They've got some really good young athletes at Camden Fairview over the next few years. So they're going to continue to stockpile down there, and they could get up Not saying they'll get up to where they were under Coach James, but they have the ability to make a run. It wouldn't surprise me if, you see those guys look up in late November, December, they're in the semifinals.
Then down in Class 4,
I can't hear you.
I did it again. Hey, we got halfway through 4A through 6A. I'm about to say I'm good for probably at least 2 on the opening show back. But what I was mentioning was you probably look at Class 4A and you think of Warren just because of what they bring back. They bring back 4 dynamic receivers that are extremely experienced, led by Razorback commit Antonio Jordan. Denton. Then you've also got Jackson Denton, a sophomore quarterback that had some learning curves as a freshman, but still had a great season. Arkadelphia, we know their defense is Coach Shucker has said that it's the best defense in 4A. They very well might be, but they've got some question marks on offense. They had those question marks last year, started slow, and then got on a run really once conference play began. So you like Arkadelphia. You mentioned Southside, Batesville just a second ago. They moved down. They got they did lose a lot, but they gained some transfers. Still expect them to be right there in the mix. Then you look at Elkins that lost a lot, but has really been kind of a quiet 4A. I don't know if I'd call them power, but they've been a consistent team up there in Northwest Arkansas. Bauxite, look, hey, Saline County always has high expectations when you think about Benton and Bryant, but then you've got Bauxite that could have probably the highest expectations under the Caleb Perry era. Then teams like Mills, Ozark, DeWitt was one that made some noise last year. Some pretty young teams for the most part, so especially DeWitt that made some noise with young players last year. So I think really in the 21st century, Warren has been always one of those teams that you've started with whenever you start projecting some of the 4A contenders. But Arkadelphia has kind of been one of those that really since about 2016, 2017 that you've looked at. So I think it probably starts. J.R. Eldridge, that era there that started with. So I think you probably start with those teams, and then you look at the South Sides, the Bauxites, also the Ozarks and so forth.
Yeah, the 2 most dynamic players in Class 4A, both named Wimberly. They're not related, though. You got Marcus Wimberly at Bauxite to do everything. He played D-back, wide receiver, running back, wildcat quarterback. And then you got the homewrecker, Wimberly, defensive end for Arkadelphia. He just gets after it. He gives offensive lines nightmares. I think he had over 20 sacks last year, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, it was just every week it was 3, 4. I think he had a 5-sack game last year. So, Arkadelphia's got to get started out faster last year. I remember when we went down there for a Sonic Blast, they had been on that losing streak, and we talked to Coach Trey Shucker, and there was no sense of panic whatsoever. Coach Shucker is one of the best young coaches in this state, bar none. We're sitting there talking to him. He's like, we just got to work through some things and get it figured out on offense. And I think they put up 55 that night. I mean, just rolled through them. And then, of course, they beat Malvern, to win the conference championship. So they got back to their winning ways real quick. So really like Arkadelphia. They just got to, make sure they come out a little bit quicker on offense this year. But at the end of the day, I still think everybody's chasing Warren. There's just too dynamic. It's been too long since Bo Embry's been to War Memorial in December, so it's just everything comes around in cycles, and they're going to come back again. So I think they're going to be the one at the end of the day. Mills dropping down from Class 5A. They lose Achilles Ringo. They lose a lot, but Coach Cortez Lee. Their problem, Kyle, is they're not going to play till the middle of September because they don't have opening games for the first 2 weeks. They don't have so they'll go into conference play only playing 1 game. So that has to get figured out a lot sooner in the future for my boys down on Dixon Road. So DeWitt, as you mentioned, then Ozark and Elkins up in the northern part of the state. Prairie Grove dropping down, from Class 5A. They should be a top 10 team. Coach Danny Absher, I believe his grandson's going to be starting at quarterback this year. That should be a lot of fun. You got some things, and then how about the Nashville Scrappers? It's weird, Kyle. I'll tell you, it is absolutely weird that, Coach Vlahovic, now the offensive coordinator up at Fayetteville, had a brief stint at Sylvan Hills he had a cup of coffee there before Coach Dick hired him at Fayetteville. So Nashville's not even in the top 10 according to Hootens, or top 10 according to anybody right now. what can Coach Jackson do down there coming over from CrossFit? They didn't get the guy they wanted, but so many expectations down there in Nashville, but to see them not, where they should be in a top 5, top 6, says a lot about the rest of the classification where they've caught up. So Elkins kind of got over the hump last year, but as you mentioned, they lost so many with Deshaun Chairs, Dizzy Dean, Slade Dean. They're all gone, but they've got some pieces. They'll figure it out. I think they're still the team to beat in the 1-4A.
Yeah, and I'll say this about Nashville because I've written publications. I think anybody that's followed my work knows that I have a lot of great relationships down there. I have since I've been in high school. And the Sean Jackson hire, I don't think that there's any kind of secret. It was a polarizing hire if you just look at social media. I will say that we live in a microwave society. I talk about that all the time. And yes, he didn't have a good record at Hayti, Missouri. He didn't have a good record at his previous job before that. But I do think that the guy deserves a chance just because he did well at CrossFit. And anytime somebody gets into a fresh job, you got to get. And now that there's some that are willing to do that, and there's some who I don't know that they are right now. Let's just, again, calling it what it is. So it is a very unique situation. It's unique. Anytime a coach gets fired that has won, over 75% of his games, including a state championship, it was weird for everybody. But I've sent a few text messages back and forth to Coach Jackson, and nothing but nice to me. And as we keep open minds, of course, we're willing to give everybody a chance. But it's I don't know if tough would be the word to use, but it's a unique time right down there in Howard County right now. Just kind of but I know that there was all kinds of things going around, but yeah, Nashville, they are a pal. Last 2 years, they kind of picked back up to maybe not the state championship ways, but they had missed the playoffs for the first season. In 2021, they missed the playoffs for the first time in like 30 years, something like that. So, they got back on track the last couple of years, made that deep playoff run in 2022. So it'll be interesting to see what happens down there in Scrapperland. But on to Class 3A now as we get to the lower classifications. I think the biggest question for everybody, Kevin, is no doubt about it that Prescott is probably the heavy favorite unanimously, I think, for most people. But will they get over the hump for the first time since 2016, the last time that they won a state championship? They've been in the state finals. They've been very close. They've made some deep runs. And then Coach Glass had talked about that really they have been stressing 73 seconds of everything, 73 seconds more of everything that they did during the offseason, whether that's lifting weights, whether that's conditioning. And we all know what that 73 seconds is from. That's that polarizing finish to the state title game. So along with the strong Bulldogs and 8-man, there's probably one or two other teams you could point to. I don't know that there is another more motivated team in the state of Arkansas, regardless of classification, than the Prescott Curly Wolves, who will now be starting Do It All, Tulsa commit, Dakari Prater at quarterback.
Yeah, and so some things you want the past to motivate you, and some things you just need to get over. And I'm not saying that Coach Glass, I think they've handled it the right way. He mentioned it a little bit at media days, and I think the kids have moved on. It's just, is it going to drive you to be that much better, 73 seconds better and everything like you mentioned. So it's going to be interesting to see how they come out. Are they going to have T-shirts or whatever? Are they going to have signs in the stands? It's it's a fast track down there at Prescott. I remember going down there for a semifinal or quarterfinal game as an official back 2016, 2017. Just 2016 was the year they won it. And they were playing McGee, and it's built for speed down there, and they got abundance of it down there, having won another state championship in track this year. So, I think. But at the end of the year, it's going to be the same two teams, Prescott and Boonville. Yeah, Boonville's going to miss Dax, but they keep rolling the same last names through there. So you're going to have some familiar names. The team to watch out for is Rivercrest, I think, dropping down from Class 4A. How are they going to look, compared to 3A competition? They're going to have some depth, speed. It's going to play well with a team like Prescott. So, and then, the wild card, the team that keeps popping up on everybody's radar is the Walnut Ridge Bobcats up in the northeast part of the state. They get a good test early with EPC. EPC is not the same team that made the state championship last year in Class 2A, but it's still a top 10, top 12 team in Class 2A. That would be a good test early on for the Bobcats.
You pretty much touched on this is how it shows we've worked together for a long time, because pretty much everything you touched on, that's what I was going to mention, starting with the 3A1, because you look at the depth of that. 2 years ago, we had two 3A1, Charleston and Boonville in the state final. And then you've also got in that mix, so Charleston, Boonville, and then who's the other one? Mansfield. Mansfield is the other one that I was thinking of, with the Burton brothers. Had a great season, made it to the semifinals last year. But then the 3A3, you mentioned about Rivercrest. Rivercrest was always kind of maybe what Elkins is now. They always tend to be maybe that forgotten one.
Yeah. They're going to win 10 games, but
right, they're going to win 10 games, and they're going to make and what will they do in the playoffs? They might make a deep playoff run, but we might tend to forget about them sometimes. But you move them down, and that 3A3, when you think about, you mentioned a second ago who was Walnut Ridge. So Walnut Ridge. 8 games last year they won. They've got 16 players that are returning, 16 starters returning. Hoxie's always really good. Newport's always athletic. And look, OCL, you mentioned Robert Hooks coming back there when we were talking about 6A. He was at West Memphis, comes back to Osceola. They had an uncharacteristic season for them, did the Seminoles, but who knows? When you get a fresh coach in there with renewed energy, you never know what could happen. So I think that 3A3, it's always very deep. I can't remember if I mentioned Hoxie in that mix either, but it's always very, very deep. And so this year, though, that could possibly be, I mean, we're using the phrase on paper again, that very well could be the deepest conference coming into the season. It sure seems like it is to me.
Yeah, and, Cavante Washington, you talked about Rivercrest. He returns at quarterback. Let's see notes. Over 2,000 yards, 24 touchdowns last year. But Walnut Ridge returns Enrique Perez, Jersey Cunningham, over 2,500 yards rushing last year. So it's, how's Walnut Ridge going to win? They're going to run the ball down your throat. You're going to play defense. That's how they're going to win. So I think when I was doing, kind of who's going to win and who's my dark horse on my scoop and score segment with Randy Renwar on Drive Time Sports, I picked Walnut Ridge to be my dark horse out of Class 3A. Yeah, it's going to take, as we know in Class 3A and 4A, the way the brackets are set up with everything, you get 5 teams from each conference that get to go in there to the playoffs. It's all about draw. I mean, we saw CAC and Elkins, early on last year, and then you had Elkins and Harding Academy in the semifinals. So it's all about draw at the end of the year. So how do you put yourself in a situation to have a good draw, have a good regular season? So I think it sets up well. Walnut Ridge averaged 36 points a game last year. That's going to be good enough. They only gave up 18. You double up your opponent, you're going to have a good season. So I'm in agreement with you right there. And then, down in the southern part of the state, I think Prescott's still running things, but now you got Fordyce and Risen in the same conference. So that traditional game that was at the beginning of the year as a non-conference game, now those guys get to play each other in a conference this season. It should be quite a ride for those two schools.
I'm glad you mentioned Fordyce. I wanted to touch on them because they came to media days, and they're going to start a freshman.
Yep.
And they brought I can't remember the young man's name. I will very soon, but they brought a freshman to media days. Now we had a few sophomores, quite a few, obviously a lot of seniors. We had a few sophomores, some juniors, but that's the only fresh. You don't see that because you don't see a lot of freshmen playing varsity. So not only is the kid talented, that just shows what a leader is. Andrell Ellis, I'm glad you looked it up. At 14, he's a big dude. And they've had big quarterbacks. They had, was it Jaheim Thomas, the Jaheim Brown that was there, and he ended up going to play linebacker for a year at SAU, but he was a big quarterback. And that was, the Jacquez Cross days, the Gary Lewis days when they were winning the state championships. But Fordyce, since they moved up to 3A, they haven't been bad. They just haven't been what they were the last couple of years in 2A when they won 2 out of the 3 state championships that they went to. So I think that this is that year that they could take Brenton Sledge, Brendan Simmons, some of those guys that have really been making plays for them over the past few years. But that's maybe the most interesting case in 4A because you've got a team that has been proven to be a small school power over the last really in the last half decade or so, and they're starting a freshman. That's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, that 8-3A conference, McGee drops down too. That was the other team I wanted to mention along with Rivercrest dropping down. But you got McGee, Fordyce, Dumas, Barton, Risen, then Drew Central, Palestine Wheatley, and Lake Village mixed in there. So, talk about Brenton Sledge. His older brother, Dearius Sledge, was on that state championship team our 2021 grad with Jaquez Cross, Gary Lewis, Jaheim Brown that you talked about. So that Sledge name is very well known down there in the southern part of the state, especially in Fordyce. He had over 1,000 yards on, I think it was under 150 carries last year. So he averaged, a good 8.5 yards per tote last year. So the thing about it is with Fordyce, you got a lot of guys going both ways. How are they going to make it through? But, I think the conference sets up really well for them. They got McGee and Fordyce will play each other in week 10. So that's that last game, probably for the conference title and likely a bye in the playoffs.
And last but not least in Class 2A, Junction City, they seem to be the talk of the town, the heavy favorite. They won 9 games last year in Class 3A. Now, they were also a quarterfinals team, one of the final 8 teams standing, and returned 15 starters. Obviously, Devin Ball knows how to win. He knows Junction City history as well as anybody. Wayne Pumphrey, who, if you follow Junction City for any extended amount of time, he is the Junction City historian, and he told me, and I quote / paraphrase, Devin Ball is one of the 2 or 3 greatest Junction City players that ever come through this school. So the guy knows what it takes. He played under.
Think about that for a minute.
That's insane. That's
insane.
insane.
Dancy,
Jamario Bell, Colby,
Bell.
Who was the guy from the 03 team? Colby played for Arkansas State that Frank Barton said might be the best player in the state or one of them.
Then you had the Byron Jones that, was all everything, didn't do anything much in college, played for the Razorbacks. But, just to say that, I mean, that's huge. And it shows a lot about the history and the tradition of the Junction City Dragons. And it's going to be good to see them at the top of classification again, Kyle. I'm just saying it feels like all is right in the world when the Dragons are up there playing for a state title.
That's right. And they play in probably the toughest conference in Class 2A. Again, using the phrase on paper, you think about Murfreesboro. You think about Mineral Springs in that conference. Now, I'll tell you what, I like Region 4 a lot. I like Carlisle in there, and we're going to get we're going to figure out a lot early in Class 2A because Junction City is traveling to Carlisle and what expects to be a premier week 1 matchup. The buzz will be there. I think I can say that. I think I can say that by now. I don't think it's really a secret.
We will all be there.
Yeah, we're going to all be there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to try to make this as big of an event as we can possibly be. I mean, it's not very often probably the last time you got this big of a matchup Carlisle and Hazen week 10 in 2022. I mean, that was that big, and that's what we expect for this one. So maybe the top favorites in there, but then you think about the Mineral Spring. Mineral Springs, I talked a second ago about how Prescott is one of those schools that is as motivated as anybody. Kevin, Mineral Springs got off to a 9-0. You think about where this team was a couple of years ago when Jason Hathcock took it over. He took over a 0-win team. They won 7 games. Yeah. Then they won 9 games last year. Of course, that game against Murfreesboro in week 10. I know the coaches are probably nauseated with us talking about it, but what a small school and what just an atmosphere, not just a small school atmosphere, an atmosphere overall. So you think about Mineral Springs, they lost that game, then they lose to Hector, get upset the next week. So won their first 9, lose their last 2. Murfreesboro felt like they let one get away from them when they lost to Mark Tree in that, the quarterfinals, that when Murfreesboro was on a really hot streak. So Mark Tree up there in the East region is going to be another one. Also, Conway Christian and Bigelow, just like Region 1 has kind of come down to those 2 teams. There's a lot of people at Conway Christian think that this is the year that they get defending champion Bigelow. Of course, defending champion Bigelow is going to look a lot different. So I think a lot of the teams last year, with the addition of Junction City coming down from 3A, I think those are probably going to be the ones that you talk about, a lot of the similar ones that we heard about in 2A last year.
Yeah, Conway Christian, I picked them as a dark horse or sleeper, whatever you want to call it, just because they didn't have the tradition, but they do have Justin Kramer, Xander Stone, Jaron Thomas. Both those guys, they're going to be on the field. One of them's going to be at quarterback. You can put the other one at running back or wide receiver. There's got so much talent out there, at the Class 2A level. But Bigelow, they're going to look a lot different. Coach Stark, Bigelow was down in the dumps. You talk about Mineral Springs when Coach Hathcock took over, but, Bigelow was the same situation, before and when Luke Starks got there. So they're going to, replacing Rhett Newmeyer, Carter Alexander had over 120 tackles last year, playing running back. But they got some depth. Talked to Craig Newmeyer, and, Rhett is a student manager for Oklahoma State now. He's going to get to help out with the the football program over there. So it's really good to see a lot of the kids that we talk about on here during their high school careers. And that's what the summer series was for, was highlighting kids at the next level doing big things. So, we wish Rhett the best over there. He's still continuing a career in football, just not on the field, so to speak. But yeah, it's going to look a lot different, for those guys at Bigelow, but run the ball and play defense. They can do that. They're going to finish in the top, 1 or 2 in their conference. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if Conway Christian can take that step under Coach Kramer. Last year it's just been kind of a stair step. 2021 they won 1 game. 2 years ago 7 games. Last year 9 games. Can they get to that 10, 11, 12 win mark this season?
Yeah, I was thinking about the Region 4 as well, and I like Des Arc's always one of those, especially since they made it to the state final a couple years ago under BJ Pascal, and of course Brandon Barbary has since taken over. They've had some good teams, so I like them. Now Hazen, I don't know. I definitely know they're not going to be the team that they were in 2022. I feel pretty confident in that. I think that they might be one of those that step back.
McCrory's going to be down a little bit.
McCrory will be down. Yeah, I think that probably Region 4. I mean, I think Carlisle is pretty much the heavy favorite in Region 4. I feel pretty confident in saying that, with maybe Des Arc mixed in there a little bit. I don't think we're missing anybody that we needed to speak about, but that's one that I'm really excited about. Carlisle and Junction City. That game, especially, we always talk about, and you and I say this all the time during the spring sports season. Put your money where your mouth is. If you've got a team that is really, really good, you're talking about it, then challenge them. And that's what we love to see. These type of games this week. I know in 6A, we mentioned about how Marion and Jonesboro, they might be that team that's going to be maybe behind Benton, at least coming into the season. Both of those teams are going to be very battle tested early on. So there's teams that you could point at across the board. But I think that will conclude we kept that under an hour, Kevin. We did really, really well. Got a lot of stuff in and under an hour for 2 to 7A.
Yeah, there were a couple of games, in week 0 that I want to throw out real quick. Of course, the Salt Bowl, you got PA Joe T. Robinson. Bentonville West Greenwood, that's a good test for both those schools. Greenwood's always going to play those 7A schools. Of course, Sheridan Whitehall, week 0 will be down there. The Sonic Blast will be down there for Coach Kevin Kelly. His debut at Sheridan Yellow Jackets. Of course, they're playing Darrell Patton's Whitehall Bulldogs. Marion and Wynn, Batesville and Searcy. Searcy dropping down to Class 5A. Camden Fairview, Arkadelphia. That's been a really good matchup the last few years. That's kind of turned into a rivalry. Bauxite Glen Rose, that's always a regional rivalry, no matter what classification those two schools are in. Rivercrest Gosnell. Really good Northeast Arkansas matchup. And then one we didn't talk about, Kyle, Greenbrier and Warren. Greenbrier dropping down from Class 6A into 5A. They'll be one of the top 5A teams and look to win the 5A West along with Farmington. That matchup against Warren is probably one of the most intriguing matchups in week 0.
I'm glad you did that, because that's a great teaser to what we'll be talking. You just basically set the show up for me next week. We'll be obviously talking about the Salt Bowl, because shameless plug, that will be the exclusive place to listen this year. I don't believe there's going to be, from what I saw, I don't believe there's going to be a pay-per-view. Now, this is the 50th meeting, if I'm not mistaken, from what I saw. 25th version of the Salt Bowl that's played at War Memorial Stadium. So very looking forward to that. This is something I look forward to. I know there's a lot of polarizing opinions about War Memorial Stadium, but it's pretty cool getting to call games there, and especially being in the same booth that other guys way before you have been able to set, the likes of Paul Ills, to name one. So looking forward to that. We'll definitely talk a good bit about the Salt Bowl next week, and we'll preview some of the top games for week 0. But Kevin, it's basically here. And then next, I guess it is here, because you got benefit games this week. I will be at Friday. I will be at Little Rock Christian for Little Rock Christian Benton. That's kind of one of the ones that I've, along with Bryant and PA, which now are conference foes. Those are the scrimmages that I've gone to the past couple of years. But I'll be honest, man, week 0, it's going to be strange, because I usually start off, there will be some Thursday games. I cover those from home typically. Then the last 4 years, I've done PA and Robinson on Friday night, and then the Salt Bowl on Saturday. So we got the Salt Bowl Saturday this year, so it's definitely going to be an adjustment for a lot of us.
Yep,
excited. It's on Friday. It's going to be on Friday this year.
Yeah, it's on Friday. Said that right. Central Arkansas, August 30th. Yeah, don't try to go downtown or, 4:30, 6:30. It's going to be packed up with 35, 40,000 fans. It'll be interesting to see how the crowd's affected with it being on a Friday after school rather than a Saturday afternoon where people have time to go out, tailgate, go out there and have a day of it. So, yeah, it should be a lot of fun, and we'll talk more about that next week.
Most definitely. So make sure if you are not already to subscribe, we'll probably start running these shows on either Monday afternoon or Tuesday. That's kind of what it's looking like for us. I wish we could have done, I'll close with this. I would have liked to do at least 2 more episodes of the summer series. The goal was to go through the beginning of really through next week into week 0, but my bonehead self didn't plan right. I've been moving, so I had a crazy personal life. And also, well, but also I didn't think about the fact that we were starting fall camp. So I just kind of put some guys in bad situations trying to get SIDs to schedule. I was like, look, we'll plan this better next year. But hey, we had a great summer with it. We started it the week out. I believe it was the week after the softball and baseball, with the weekend of champions. And then we pretty much had something, whether it was baseball, softball, or football every single week. So a lot of fun with that. So, but yes, make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or on Apple, Spotify, if you like Apple or Spotify, if you like the audio versions, wherever you listen to your podcast, we are there. And we will see you next week for Kevin Bohannon and all of us here at Natural State Sports. My name's Kyle Sutherland. Take care.